Yeah.
Get a different one. So, how was it from last time? I know it was only a couple days ago. Thursday, it was on Thursday. This is Saturday. What were you left with any kind of impressions regarding this work that we did into attitude? Measurable, reasonable, impartial,
Right.
unconditional, and honest. Yeah. Were you left
Honestly,
with anything?
I want to work further into it. I realized that I did not have been a kind of an interesting Friday. So I basically want a day for myself to basically delve into, open it up, because I
All
feel like
right.
I never gave it justice, if that makes sense, or
Well,
brought
it's
it to
only
light.
been it's only been 2 days, so don't be too
Well,
hard on
I
yourself.
I try to stay active, and yesterday was my. I have these days occasionally where I just it's downtime, as I call it, and I just watch a movie, just mindless, not mindless, but just not driving at anything, whether it's building something or playing with some physics project or
No,
delving into whatever, right? So that's my downtime. I get
that's fine.
my rest, if you will.
Good. Good to hear that. I'll work that in, okay? I'll work that into the lesson today.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I think that's actually an important facet, facet of the work.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm just going to kind of give a quick recap because we already have the video of it anyway.
Right.
It's, you can always go back and look at it.
Yep.
It's curious. It only seems to do it when I'm close. I'll stay back. The flashing. I'm talking about the
Yeah,
flashing.
I noticed that too. I noticed that too. Yeah.
Okay. I'll work from back here. Um, so just kind of a quick recap. You've got measurability in the thinking center, right?
Right.
You have to be able to measure not only the results but also I would also say assessment or assay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know the term assay
Yes.
something. Yeah,
Yes.
along with the idea of measurement in the emotional center. It has to be able to apply some sort of reason to it. There has to be reasonability with it. If there isn't reasonability with it, the emotional center is going to go into turmoil about it, right? Here's a great example. As a child, I'm sure you had the situation once or twice or 100 times, like most children do in our culture, where you're told to do something by your parents, or pardon me, or another authority figure,
Right.
and you throw a tantrum about it. Right? Now, a tantrum is an emotional perturbation in the emotional center. It's an emotional perturbation. Now, the reason for it is because your emotional center doesn't find it reasonable. You're instructed to clean your room, but you were about to go out and play with your friends. Your friends only have a certain time frame, right? 7 to 9 p.m. that they're going to be out and about and kicking around and this sort of thing. And your parents want you to clean your room before you go out. Now you say, okay, that's going to take an hour. That means that I only have an hour to play with my friends. You see, and it doesn't sit with reason inside the emotional center, so it causes conflict, it causes heat in the emotional center, and you're throwing a fit, whatever the case might be.
Right. Right.
Right? This is why reasonability goes with the emotional center. So moving center, it has to be impartial. Why do you suppose that is? Why do you suppose the moving center? Uh, let's take it from the opposite approach. What is it about partiality that is heating or disruptive to the moving center?
Repeat that question again.
Instead of saying impartiality, what is it about partiality that is heating, being partial to something that's
Right. Right.
heating to the moving center?
Oh, the first thing that came to mind is basically it's out of balance, contradictory, um, tilted. That I feel more is more on the instinctual center where it wants that balance, wants that equilibrium.
Well,
The
that's
moving,
honesty, isn't it?
yeah,
Honesty needs to have no conflict.
exactly.
Dishonesty will always cause some kind of imbalance in the instinctive center. Right? If you're not honest with yourself, if you're not honest with someone else, I mean, in behavioral science and psychology and those types of things, we have a different term for it, which is incongruence.
Yes.
Yeah, someone's actions are incongruent with their words. It causes that imbalance, that friction in the instinctive center. You know, you look at what a person's doing, and it doesn't match what they're saying. That's an instinctive result. Says, this isn't honest. Yeah. Then the emotional center tries to justify it by putting reasons into it where they don't belong.
Right.
Yeah. All right. But impartiality. Well, listen, it's something to ponder, okay? The
Yes.
impartiality of the moving center.
Right.
Part of it has to do really, and you talked about this before, having to do with the frequency of something, because the moving center is very much attuned to just doing. It just does what needs to be done at the moment. There's no forethought in the moving center whatsoever. There's
Right.
no deliberation in the moving center. If there is deliberation, it's coming from the instinctive center, like the example of trying to jump a long distance. Yeah? Thinking you were Superman and can fly 18 feet and, hitting the ground, that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. Right. But that kind of hesitation actually comes from the instinctive center because of its job. And also because of its honesty, because your instinctive center, if you were listening to it at the point in time, was saying, hey, listen, you're not Superman.
Yeah.
Right? Tugging on your cape, that's dishonest. You're not Superman, right? But yeah, the impartiality of the moving center is really just a function of its immediacy. The moving center is very much always in the present. You can't give another example. You can't tap your fingers in the past as a moving center function. People have habits.
Right. Right.
Habit life is part of the moving center process. Yeah. Now, try to tap your fingers in the future or in the past. It's no longer moving. It switches obviously to intellectual or thinking center type of behavior, or even sexual center from a fantasy point of view. So impartiality really has to do with the immediacy of the moving center. It doesn't work on timelines. It's only present.
Right. Right.
Okay. Now, interestingly enough, the moving part of the thinking center can forecast movements. You probably remember an exercise in learning how to precast, which is a precursor to having clairvoyance, right? Where you stand and you pick a spot on the floor and you visualize every movement to get yourself there. And once you have that in place, you have almost like an echo of movements in front of you. Then you begin to walk it and you see how well it matches up to
Right.
getting to that point. All right. That would be the moving part of the thinking center that does that. I'm just going to kind of tie in a bunch of different weaves, okay, around the
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Right. So unconditional, sexual center, unconditional. In one of the archives, and I wouldn't be able to tell you which one, but in one of the archives of the Eminent, Leo talks about sex. And in essence, makes a statement akin to it's either pleasurable or nothing. If the sexual center is working correctly, it's either pleasurable or nothing. It's not displeasurable. It's not riddled with conditions. It's not riddled with tinctured qualities and this type of stuff, right? That's the kind of the pure aspect of it. So I think unconditional is very very appropriate for this one. And then honest, we already talked about that, didn't we?
Right.
Let's go in a reverse direction. You probably, I mean, the pentagram is kind of all over the place, isn't it? You see it in so many different cultures, but let's break something down. In China and India, they use it a very similar way to which we use it, but they attribute different qualities to it. They will
Yes.
say air. That's a bad A. Okay, and fire, water, earth, and depending on how they're talking about or what they're saying, it will be void, it will be metal sometimes.
Right.
No, I'm sorry. No, incorrect. Metal would be air sometimes. It will be wood. Okay. So void, wood, we'll get to the reason why. It's actually a pretty simple explanation. But you've got air, fire, water, earth, and wood.
Right.
Okay, now what they have worked out is that if you follow one particular direction, and I actually drew it backwards from the way that they would do it, I'm going counterclockwise, whereas they would have done this in a clockwise direction. But fire creates earth. Once fire has extinguished its source of fuel, it becomes ash. Okay, and now this is where the air slash metal kind of comes into it. But earth, once it solidifies, becomes metal, or it can also seed the air is another way of thinking it. But that hardness, it's not necessarily talking about like steel or copper or whatever, but
Right.
becoming rock, becoming that really hard mineralized substance, takes on the characteristic of something like metal. Or you can look at it from the standpoint of it seeding the air with particulates, which then causes it to rain and becomes water. And so that's the next part of the cycle. And then water causes wood to grow, and wood is combustible and generates fire. Okay, so that's called the creative cycle. All right, now the destructive cycle, and again, I'll go counterclockwise. Do you have this? Do you want to take a minute to kind of get this, or do you have it?
Got it drawn up.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
And I've seen this before. I've worked on it a little bit in the past. So yeah, we're good.
So you've got white stock for it. You've got reference for it. Okay. Good. Now, the destructive cycle, air feeds fire, but in the process, air is consumed by fire. Okay?
Right.
And so you've got this kind of consumption aspect going on. Fire consumes air. Water consumes fire. Pour a bucket of water on the fire, extinguishes it. Earth consumes water, meaning that it absorbs it. It takes away its fundamental quality of fluidity. And wood breaks up the solidity of earth through its roots, through its capillary actions. It
Right.
yeah, it breaks it up. Yeah, so it takes away these kind of fundamental nature of things. Now, this is very applicable to this. You can see from this that if fire destroys air, then impartiality destroys measurability. How do you figure? See, I make a bold statement and then I ask you for the answer.
They're two extremes, basically. They're two extremes. They're two ends of the bar.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. They're polar opposites. The one is basically you could say chaos. The other one is order. The one is you have precision, and then on the other side you have randomness. They're just basic. They're on the same bar, but they're just
They are. You're right.
they're
They're
on two
definitely
ends
on
of
the
the
same
bar.
bar, but it's
Yeah,
positive, negative, right? In there.
exactly. But
What
they're
about,
opposite ends. I'm sorry.
no, 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 it's good. What about measurability destroying unconditionality, consuming unconditionality? Heisenberg stumbled across this one, didn't he?
I was gonna. Yep, yep. Heisenberg.
Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Yes.
It's a great way to get out of speeding tickets, by the way. Cop pulls you over, says, do you know how fast you were going? You say, no, but I know exactly where I was. Right. And then the cop says, well, and then you say, where did you clock me? And the cop says, I clocked you right there. And you say, well, then you couldn't have known how fast I was going. Right? Heisenberg's uncertainty principle basically says that you can't know the momentum and the position of something at the same time.
Yes. Yes. Love it. Absolutely love it.
And then you get Schrodinger in the car, and he can defeat it. Yeah. Be like, well, you made me speed because you measured my speed.
Yeah.
I was just a wave function of any particular kind of, I could have been going 0 miles an hour or 400 miles an hour. And I wasn't going any of those until you measured me. So that's called entrapment.
Yes.
Hate to pull that team over, wouldn't you?
I'm sorry?
Hate to pull that team over, wouldn't you, in the car if you were a
Oh my Lord.
police officer?
It'd be a riot, though. That would be a riot.
I mean, you could probably take it to court, couldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't violate the laws of physics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Entrapment and the idea that you can't know the position and the speed at the same time. So which is it? Where was I, or how fast was I going? And if I was going too fast, then where was I? Can't tell me? Tickets out. Hey, it's an aside.
Yes,
Okay.
oh my God.
Right. So in that case, then unconditionality destroys reasonability. Now here's an interesting one, because what that actually speaks to is standards, right? If you're completely unconditional about the attitude that you hold, then it no longer becomes reasonable. So what I'm trying to point at, or what I'm trying to drive at with this, is that there has to be the right proportions of things in this. It might sound a bit contradictory to say that you have a limit within your unconditionality. Let me give you an example, though. You say, I will never cause pain, right? I would never take a knife and cut somebody with it unless I'm a surgeon. Right?
Right.
You can't be unconditional. You have to have limits on your unconditionality, because surgeons do it all the time, don't they? They take a knife and they open someone up and it does cause pain, but it's reasonable in that condition. It would be unreasonable for a surgeon to have no conditions whatsoever on their exercise of pain in certain situations. Does that make sense?
Yes, oh, totally does. Totally does.
Yeah. Reasonability can destroy honesty. It's called justification.
Yep. Yep.
Isn't it? Right? Someone justifies a behavior by implementing a strong set of reasons to the point where the honesty of the situation is no longer intact.
That's exactly. I've seen that. Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
And honesty destroys impartiality. How do you figure that? Can you give me an example of how honesty in excess destroys impartiality?
Yeah, God, I can see it. I can't quite put it in words, but it's honesty is a funny one. Sometimes one needs to not be honest, not lie, but just not be honest. You know,
Well,
you just Keep it
Yeah.
to yourself, but too much honesty can throw the scales out of tilt.
If
It could cause.
if we're honest, right? I mean, you see these movies about AI taking over the world and
Right, right.
destroying humanity. You got Terminator and Skynet and all this kind of stuff in there. Now, if you look at human behavior as a whole from a very honest perspective, you could say that we're very much like a parasite or maybe even a virus because we're killing our host. We're not. Parasites will try and preserve the host, right? It'll create an environment where it can propagate, but many parasites will not destroy the host because
Right.
then it destroys their ecology. Viruses uh, anyway, my point is this: is that from a certain perspective, you could honestly look at humans and the way that we go on this planet, and say that we are viral or parasitic. Right? Now, does that make it reasonable to extinguish humanity?
That's exactly. So that's very, very good analogy.
Mm.
Um, on one hand, yes, the restart, but the reasonable answer, the actual answer would be no.
Well, of
That'd
course.
be that'd be one extreme right there. Yeah, and it's funny because the pentagram, the way that you just opened it up, to me, I was talking to somebody the other day, and what it comes down to is it's got to be in balance. Okay, so you have a car tire, it gets balanced before you put it on the car, otherwise it's gonna tear your vehicle up. Not to go into all of that. Squirrel cage on a blower, same thing. If you go in and clean it, you're gonna basically have one center basically supercharged, another one diminished, and you're gonna be out of whack. It's gonna tear itself up.
Yes.
But so many examples in life where if something is not in balance, it just it causes it causes problems or busts apart, blows apart, or whatever. But yeah, it was so odd to see that come to my mind that here a couple of days ago was talking about how things need to be in balance, and here we're talking about the pentagram and it coming into this whole thing of without it being in balance, there's no you say you need to rotate at a certain speed. You're only let's say your dryer is an example. If it's out of balance, or your washer, I'm sorry, your washer out of balance. It goes wumpity wumpity. It cannot extract the excess water at the end. Okay.
Yes. Walking across the floor and you still get wet clothes, don't you?
Exactly. And that's the way I just had this whole image of us as a human being or a human beings. The same thing is that we're not able to get up to that frequency or get to that state that we should be in because we're out of balance, we're out of kilter, and
Yes.
you just can't spin.
Yeah, right. And so what I wanted to do was to add a bit more flavor to last week's meeting from the standpoint of keeping things within, can't even really say reason, can you? Because that's just an emotional center. But having boundaries, having balance with these five when you create an attitude, when you
Yeah.
decide to manufacture an attitude, you have to watch the balances of different things because if you're overly impartial, right? I mean, any one of these is out of balance, then you'll go into the world with an attitude that isn't appropriate for every situation, or maybe not even appropriate at all. Yeah? What it leads to is a sense of being tyrannical or militant.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to spin you out into something else. It's not there's not being a balance. You're literally going to fly off at some other tangent, spin
Yeah.
out.
Oh.
Hitler was one example that just came to mind. Not to go there, but just
Yeah.
that if somebody is out of alignment. um,
I mean, he was a vegetarian for crying out loud, Hitler,
yeah,
right?
right.
And also very, very much into the occult and spirituality and all this type of stuff. Clearly, something was, as you said before, out of whack, though,
Yeah.
because, well, in his example, the measurability was only the pure bloodline, right? Only a certain
Yes.
type of genetic. Reasonable could definitely say that was out of balance. Impartial, probably in balance. Unconditional, definitely out of balance. And honest, probably in balance in Hitler's case.
Right, right.
I mean, his standard of was it eugenics? Is that the right term for it?
Yes, I believe it
Yeah,
was called eugenics. Yeah.
yeah, eugenics, right? Or ethnic cleansing would be a better would be a more modern term, not a better term. There's nothing cleansing about ethnic cleansing, is there?
No, no.
Yeah, right. Okay. So yeah, great example. Great example.
Yeah, I just say, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Go
No, no,
ahead.
no. It's good. I just want to put this in as an elevation to the meeting we had a couple days ago, because it can
Yes.
seem very absolute when in fact it's something that really demands more refinement. You don't just put an attitude in place and then walk away and be like, thank God I've got that attitude now, right? Like
Yeah.
like you have a cupboard full of attitudes, and you're like, okay, which one do I need today? What do I need for this particular situation? No, it's an aspect of refinement. You have to dust them off from time to time, and this has been said for decades, hasn't it? When it
Yes.
comes to standards, when it comes to values, when it comes to all of these types of things that we have been encouraged to develop for 60 years now, 50, 60 years. And it's been kind of one of the topics that keeps coming back for the last half a century, doesn't it? We have
Right.
to take these things down once in a while and see if they're still appropriate. Dust them off, check them for cracks, check them for holes, check them for malfunction, fix what needs to be fixed and update, upgrade, refine.
Yeah. Do you ever notice in yourself there comes a point where, and it's not planned, but it comes on, and you have this need coming from the core of you to address that.
Yeah,
I
sure.
mean, I find that come up, on its own timings. There's nothing that I plan, but I feel it. There's sometimes I'm coming home from work, or out walking the dogs, whatever it is, and I start to realize that I have this need arising in me to address certain things, and a lot of times it is, what are my standards at this point? Because I saw an action either in myself or about somewhere outside of me, and I thought of what my stance is on that, right? And then I realized, wait a minute, that's kind of rusty, so to speak, because now I have new knowledges, new experiences, new input, and I realize that's kind of out of kilter, not correct anymore. And then that just starts that process where I've got to go in and start looking, okay, what am I will have, won't have? What were my standards? Where am I at with things? And a lot of times I go, wow, that's pretty outdated,
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how that arises naturally, or in me. And I've often wondered if that I'm sure it happens in pretty much everybody. If they feel it, aren't aware of it, it's another story. But I think that happens to people where we have to reassess, and we have to basically bring ourselves up, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I feel like I'm starting to ramble now. But anyway, I think you got the
You're
point.
not. You're not. You're not
Okay.
rambling.
Okay.
You're circling the territory.
That's kind of what I feel like I'm
No,
trying to
it's,
find.
it's the way you work. I've noticed this about you, right? It's the way you work. You spiral in, you converge on what it is that you're trying to get across, and it's a really brilliant way of working because it's it allows me to watch your process unfold right in front of me. Yeah, such a beautiful thing. A lot of times you'll have a conversation with somebody and they'll just pop out with what they believe without giving any kind of foundation.
A laser, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
right. So, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for doing it.
definitely.
Watch you kind of converge on an answer. Speaking of foundations, let's say this. Let's see.
So often when I hear foundation, I think of found a nation is the
Oh,
thing rhymes in my head at that point, almost not simultaneous, but comes straight after that, reading or hearing the word foundation. Um, Found an addition or I found something, found an ion.
Yeah, found at ion.
Put here.
Portrayal. How about that? Keep writing from the side. I think that's fairly level. Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think about, when your handwriting goes like climbs or descends or
I've often, yes, and
yeah, it's one of those things that you think about when you're in front of a chalkboard in front of people. Like start up here and you end up right in a downward 45-degree angle or something. Mostly it's to do with the angle, but I think this is the correct order for things. Last week or on Tuesday, Thursday, I should say, we started with attitude, and that's where we came up with this diagram on the board. But what we really should have, the way we should have approached it, should have been from the standpoint of foundations.
yeah, this is what it is.
Build a house on a foundation, right? The house would be the house would actually be the portrayal, but the framework would be built upon the foundation. And so the foundation of this type of work really has to do with man the machine, how we're assembled, how we're put together, the fact that we have 5 centers and 2 higher faculties, 2 angels, higher emotional and higher mentality or higher thinking center, however you want to put it. Then once you have a foundation, it's like if you're going to become a mechanic, you don't start at the other end. You don't start fixing cars. You start learning about how an engine works, compressions and pistons and the stochastic whatever, you know what I mean, like
yes,
I think that's the right term. It's probably not, but it doesn't matter.
All right.
I'm not a mechanic, right? You get called a mechanic. But yeah, you've got to have that sort of foundation. How would you know how to develop an attitude if you didn't even know that you have 5 centers that all speak a different language and think in different ways? That process, I should say, not think, but process in different ways.
Yeah, yep. Sorry about that. So I had to grab a prop here for a moment. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I got one over there.
Okay, so that's our foundation.
Got his relative right here.
I noticed that the other day.
No, everyone should have a skeleton on their bookshelf, right? Take it out of the closet, put it on. Go ahead.
So yeah, with this foundation right here, we have all the intricacies that are hung on it, basically, like our skin is the outer shell of it. At that point, I just had this image going through from the oh my Lord, I can't even think of from the foundation, basically, and then all the way out. You showed me your shirt, if that makes sense. You showed me your shirt, and that's like another level. I can't even think of them all now. But as we work through the pentagram, I just had this. Yes,
portrayal is
this would be the portrayal.
Out of these 4 that I put up here, I've got foundation, attitude. I should put attitudes.
Yes.
Foundations, right? To S to put upon another thing in the output.
Right. Exactly.
And then portrayals.
Yes, because you don't have one shirt, you have multiple. Yeah. So anyway, I just thought it's another example of how this is not just a singular. This goes everywhere. This applies to everything. You can see the example of this in real terms, basically, at the moment, right in front of us. I just want to point that out because I find it so fascinating. So many times I start to read something on chemistry, physics, alchemy, whatever it may be, or read some archives, and sometimes it's interesting to watch myself not really grasp it, if that makes sense. But then
Yeah.
I go and I turn around, I see a skeleton, and all of a sudden everything what we've been talking about, attitude and the foundation, it clicks and it goes, wait a minute, this is literally my whole point is that I'm getting excited about the fact that this is everywhere and it's not
Yes.
singular, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Okay. So once you have the foundations, which in this case, this is loaded with foundations. Now you have the foundational view that you have five centers that all speak a different language and that process in different ways. And then you add to that the foundation of the types of ingredients that goes into an attitude and how they can either enhance or detract one another. And so then you get the foundational concept of balance within the realms of these types of things. Otherwise you got a lopsided pentagram, kind of standing like this.
exactly.
Yeah, so these are all and we talked about the elements. You've got air, earth, fire, water, wood in there, which are all just metaphorical.
Yes.
Do you know
Yes.
how many decades it took me to figure that out? That
It
they're
took me.
metaphorical. Because I learned about this when I was a child. I learned about the five elements when I was a child. Really did, and it was a puzzle for decades. It wasn't until my mid-20s that I was able to see it from the standpoint of it's metaphorical. Yeah, it's all just metaphorical. Same thing with alchemy. Same thing, actually. Exactly the
Yep.
same. Yeah.
Yep.
You've got your foundations. You've got some of the stock behind it, I think would be another way to put that. And I do believe that your observation about the word found in there is very accurate from the standpoint of it's no good me standing up here telling you how it works. Until a person has the realization for themselves from their own life that they have these five centers, then it's all just theoretical. You couldn't even call it foundational. You could just call it theory at that
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
It,
So
yes.
I think
Yes.
foundation also implies personal development from the standpoint of inner work and inner observation. How are you going to know that you have five centers unless you observe them in operating inside you? This is the difference between an Eamon theorist and a way man. Because you don't need Eamon if you're way. You can open it up from any angle. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can also sense it because you're going to know somebody's and I don't mean this in a derogatory way whatsoever. You're going to
A
see somebody.
liar?
I'm
A
sorry.
liar? Is that
Yeah,
what you were going to
basically.
say?
Yeah, you're going to see somebody as a liar,
Nothing
or the
wrong with
other is
that.
it's dead coming out of them, or it's theoretical, it's clinical, and that's what I met a lot of in that arena back then. It was all theoretical. There was no life in a meaning. They had never done the work themselves. They didn't experience it, and it would be the same as when I was a kid. When I same thing as you is I came across all this arcane knowledge that dust covered books in the library nobody ever checked out since the day they were brought into the library, and here these young kids going up and picking them out. But the content was what amazed me, and then like yourself, it took me years before I realized that this is not. I would look at a chunk of wood and a chunk of iron and a chunk of and that to me is what it was
Yeah.
until down the road it became where I had that awakening or that realization, that understanding it was metaphorical. This is not a chunk of wood or a piece of iron or whatever. This is metaphorical. The same with alchemy and so forth. Now, where was I going with this?
So
Um, I'm sorry.
theory versus observation.
Yes, and I don't remember where. It wasn't long back. I read something about, or maybe watched a video about physics, or maybe it was alchemy or chemistry. It doesn't matter. Somebody said to their students or said to the class, or whatever, for one, this is really, really expensive to make. And everybody starts cracking up because it's actually you can go down and find a piece of twine or string and build this apparatus to prove, or not prove, but to actually get inside this experiment. And his other point was bring it to life, basically, if that makes sense. And this is exactly what I saw later. I don't want to say unfortunately, but it took some time within that society to realize that they're not living what they're proselytizing, if that makes sense.
You can't make, yeah, you can't make a blanket statement like that. But some individuals haven't done the work. We can.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, let me. Yeah, I want to restate that because some of the ushers and some of the people that were seniors. I mean, they'd get a good roasting here and there. They'd come in. You read in the archives. Bloody hell, do the work. Go out and go out with a whore of the night, and then go out and get drunk and basically be a man. Things like this is wake up calls. Basically, it's like, hey, you're getting not sedentary. You're basically like sediment. You're settling out instead of doing the work. You're not active. So yeah, I'm sorry about this
I
whole
think the
thing.
benefit of Leo was that he showed people that a man can do the work.
Exactly.
Breaking that stop situation barrier
Yeah.
of this can be done by a human. This is why I don't buy into this idea that came about later that Leo was something other than a man, other than a human. I think he would have argued that vehemently.
Oh yes, I truly believe that. Truly believe that.
I mean,
Yeah.
it became the rumor, right? It became the rumor that he was born developed. Well, if that's the case, then might as well quit,
Yeah.
yeah, because
Yeah.
you can't do it. If
Yeah.
that's really the fact of it, then what business do we have even trying to do it? The whole concept is that a man can figure this out. A lady can figure this out. I wasn't being gender specific. Yeah. A human born like any other baby on the planet, undeveloped and drooling, can do this work.
Yeah. Oh, he made that clear, especially during the conference in Colorado. He made that clear throughout the archives. That yeah. So that's why it really. I don't want to say it frightened me. I kind of it's. I guess sadly enough, it's to be expected when somebody you see it all around the world in different faiths and religions. When somebody passes, they become idolized, and somebody said to me something about Christ, resurrection or the second coming of Christ. He's coming down from the heavens and gold or a red flowing robe and all this, and I thought, wow, you guys have gotten so demented in your view of what he was, what he is, and it's so fantastically different.
Yeah.
And that's what I seen with Leo is hearing some of the things in the and they weren't as dramatic as you stated with this other group that I attended a few meetings with. Is there's this reverence that has gotten to a godly state, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I
Well, okay. And here's the thing: is that there's nothing wrong with it if it's earned and also taken from the attitude of awe for what AWE for what
yes,
someone can accomplish in their journey. Yeah. Then it's okay to have reverence for what someone has become,
oh,
but not
definitely.
who they are.
It came down to reverence to something that was, from what I could perceive, was starting to be fabricated. I don't know the depths of it, but it's just like making him I've seen this in the Catholic Church, the canonization, the saints after somebody dies, all this all of a sudden Saint Valentine's this superhero, and he's this character and all that. But if you really look at the reality of it, he was a pretty brutal individual. But when they canonized him, they idolized him. They made this image that's not reality, and that's what I feel what happened with Leo in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's interesting. Now each one of these, the foundation, all the way through to the not display, but the
Portrayal.
trail. Thank you. Actually runs through the pentagram, which is very interesting. As we were having a dialogue there, I was thinking about each one of these You actually have to work through the pentagram with to the right on the board to the right. You have to go through each one of those steps. Does that make sense? Am I
Well,
doing this? This is where I'm kind of seeing each one. It's almost like you go through it and you can go up to the next notch, if you will, deepen it. Not necessarily, it's not lock. I'm not saying it's locking you out. You can open it up through the foundation, through the pentagram, right? And you can take attitudes. You can work through the pentagrammic,
yeah,
and you.
right.
So you see what I'm saying? It's not
Yeah.
that I cannot go from foundations to attitudes or attitudes to standards. It's not it, but one can actually work through. Am
It's
I
actually
wrong?
more like this, if I may.
Yeah,
We're on a different frequency when we're talking about these four.
right. No, exactly.
What this is more discussing is the idea of the triad, the package
Yes,
symbol. You've
right.
got the three here: foundations, attitudes, and standards. And then portrayal is the
The-
resultant aspect in the middle.
right, right.
Yeah. Right. So not exactly pentagrammic, although I see where you're going with that.
Yeah, it's can't quite put it together, but I see it. Um uh, uh, I don't want to ramble too much. That's what I tend to do for myself. I tend to ramble around with it for a while, and I bounce around the room, basically, if you will, and then I finally come down to what it is. I don't want to take up our time right now doing that, but I see it. That's kind of what I see right now. Is
Nothing wrong with working something out live in the moment. Okay.
no, definitely,
Nothing
definitely.
wrong
I
with
just
that whatsoever. So
yeah, I feel like there's something else that needs to be opened up before I start gobbling up the time today. I don't know how to explain that. I just feel like something else needs to appear to come
it
to.
does. Where
So
we need to get with this today is to make it something that's practical, because I
right,
talked a bit ago about theory, and it's one thing to say, oh yeah, measurable, reasonable, impartial, unconditional, and honest, and the five centers in the pentagram, and earth, water, fire, wood, and all of these types of things. And we could end it there. We could say, okay, wow, what a great meeting. What a great meeting, to get so much information. And then we hang up the call and go about our days and do nothing with it. And
right,
this has been the disease of the way, not just a particular way, but it is the disease of the way, is the lack of it's not the lack of take up itself, it's the lack of ability to take up. You can learn scads of things. I mean, what a rich heritage we have behind us.
exactly.
But if you can't actually do anything with it, then at the end of the day, it'll weigh more than the feather, won't it?
Can I throw in an analogy real quick to
Of
bring.
course.
So coming back to that instructor, that professor with his physics thing, um, what I realized at that point is it was taking it out of the textbook learning and bringing it into real life, where these students would get inside of it and truly understand it. I don't know if I'm wording it like you're. I'm trying to bring it like an analogy into it.
Let me offer a different analogy.
Yes.
See if this resonates, okay?
Okay.
Now, you, you know the idea behind magic, right? Black magic, white magic, all this type of stuff, planetary magic, all these types of things.
Right.
Um, it's gotten so skewed in modern times that you can literally go onto Amazon and order a cup. You can order a wand. You can order a dagger. You can order a pentagram. You can order all of these things. But let me tell you how it used to actually work. If you were a magician's apprentice, an aspiring magician, right, wanting to wield the occult forces of the universe, what you had to do was you would go to the master magician and he would say, up in the mountains, yeah, there's a particular place And you'll feel it when you get there because things will start to become disoriented in you. In that mountain, you'll find a stone, a particular kind of stone. Dark gray in color describes it, heavy, this type of thing. If you take that stone and you drag it across the dirt, it will begin to pick up bits of iron. Right. Lodestone is what I'm talking about.
Right. I knew that.
Magnet.
Yeah.
Yeah, magnet.
Yeah.
It'll begin to pick up iron. If you scrape that iron off, and then in the dirt, make the shape of a dagger, get some fire, get a pot, melt the iron that you acquired from the use of the magic lodestone, melt it, pour it into the shape of the dagger in the ground there where you have this mold, pull the dagger out, sharpen it, polish it, sleep with it, become one with this dagger that you've made from the lodestone, from the iron filings, from the fire, from the mold. You see, it would take decades to be able to manufacture all of the equipment just to become a magician, to the point where you have your chalice, you have your pentagram, you have your dagger, you have your wand, these various different things. Now, it wasn't so much that those things have power, right? You can go on Amazon, like I said, and order a magician's dagger, you can order a magician's wand, all of these types of things. They have no power, of course. I mean, it's just a stick and a hunk of metal and various other things, isn't it? A piece of wood. What it was the magician's apprentice, putting his or herself into the act of making these things that gave it so much power. Yeah. So if you spend 10 years making a dagger or making a wand and investing so much of your own soul force into this object, when you wield it with the kind of power that it has absorbed from your efforts, it does have magic, you see. And that's what people are missing in the way. It's one thing to say 5 centers, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Another thing to put 10 years worth of work into it and actually come out with something that has power, that is powered based on the life force that you've put into it. That's the difference between theory and actual ability.
No, exactly. Exactly.
Did you know that about magicians, how they used to be trained?
Yes. And it all has to do with alchemy.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean,
And
everything has to do with
the
everything
whole
in the
process,
end, doesn't it?
the whole process you were talking through, I was just like, wow, this is so amazing.
It's alchemical. You're right.
Here
You're right.
again,
Yeah. I
because
mean,
you're
it
doing the
takes
physical action.
decades to make the philosopher's stone, doesn't it?
Exactly. And what it is by taking that iron from the ground, you're I forget all the terminology. You're going through all the 12, basically 12 steps of alchemy. Okay.
Mm.
Going through the 7 planets, you're going through this whole process. But what I'm starting to realize about alchemy is at the same time, not really necessarily the same time, but that is the same process that we do for ourselves. Now, listening to the story about the wizard, the apprentice, basically on his journey to become a journeyman, if you will, or a full-fledged wizard or magician, rather. Those actions is actually what's also going on in him.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
absolutely stunning. So I'm going to say thank you. Just all of a sudden, everything starts clicking together. It was wonderful to hear that.
Yeah, right. It's the life force that you put into something, not the thing itself.
Yes.
This is why, I mean, a tarot deck is nothing more than bits of ink and cardboard or
Right.
paper,
Right.
without actually investing oneself into understanding the mosaic of esoteric concepts that goes into a particular tarot deck. It
No,
literally
exactly.
means nothing
Right.
whatsoever. It's barely worth the paper it's printed on, as they say.
A couple of pretty pictures, and that's about it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Right. Anyway, right. So that was a bit of a tangent, but
Yeah.
we have to start with the foundations and put the work into actually recognizing, not from a theoretical standpoint, but from an actuality, that the foundations are actually part of you, actually part of what constitutes you as a human on the planet at this time. You are a pentagram and many other things, of course, but in this respect. So once
Right.
you've got the foundations, then you begin to develop attitudes. And sometimes you make mistakes, and that's okay. You can approach life or approach a certain situation with an attitude and come away realizing that it wasn't appropriate. Yeah? Not not everything demands a roasting, for example, right? You
Right.
might spend
Right.
a lot of time developing the ability to roast something in someone, blast it out of them, right? This type of thing. And it just doesn't work. So,
Right. Right.
but the formula for creating attitudes does have to start with the foundation, which is why it comes about from the pentagrammic alignment of things. Yeah. So then you've got these attitudes, and you refine and you adjust them. Once you get enough attitudes collected, then you can begin to build standards out of them. And I said this last time. If you hold a particular attitude about the house, the home you live in, I should say, it will bleed over into other aspects of your life. It will also make sense at work. It will also make sense when you're on a walk in the park and find a piece of trash on the ground. It's the same standard, but it borrows from a series of different attitudes that you have developed about the sacredness of the environment in which you live. Yeah. So standards are a combination of multiple attitudes built on foundations.
Right.
Portrayals, you mentioned my shirt, yeah?
Yes.
It's the portrayal. It's
Yes.
silver today because I want it to be silvery in
Yes.
my expression.
Yes.
I think I'm doing that.
Wonderful. I felt that. I knew that right from the when you start putting your shirt out.
Yeah,
I just want to put out kudos, but I didn't want to taint the pot, but I wanted to say I observed and noticed.
yeah, it needs to be
Yeah.
what I registered or what I came to about how today needs to be was that it need to have a silver frequency to it to be able to get through. Yeah. And so this is the portrayal. Now,
Yeah.
you could just see me at a bar, right? And I think this is a cool shirt, right? I'm standing out. I look
Right.
different than
Right.
everybody else, that type of thing. And yes, that would be a portrayal, but it would be backed by something completely different
Right.
than why I'm wearing it today.
Exactly. Exactly.
Portrayals can be deceptive. And we know this, especially if someone goes straight for portrayal without the standards, attitudes, and foundations to back it up. Because if you learn the lingo, if you get a bit of the stock, especially in something like this kind of work or the way, you could go out there and you could blow people away by what you say, even if you don't believe it or have the content behind it to back it up.
Oh,
That's portrayal with no foundation, attitude, or standard behind it. Or you can come out with a very simple portrayal, very meek or meager, not meek. You can have a very meager portrayal about something, but people will sense the content behind it. That's much
right.
more important than the external portrayal.
Exactly.
So,
Uh,
hey, you opened that up. Something you said got that to pop out today. So thank you.
That's awesome. It's awesome. Hunting Will.
Goodwill Hunting?
Oh, Goodwill Hunting. Where he's in the cafe, he's hitting on the gal, and this guy comes over and he's starting to talk smack. That's
Yes.
exactly what you just described, right there,
Yeah.
played out. The whole
I got a number. How about them apples, right?
yes, yes, yes,
Sure.
yes. It was wonderful because you realized at that point the fellow was all about portrayal, but it was all a facade, all a puff of smoke, basically. It was very interesting that as you were walking through that, I could see that process from that movie unfold forget the movie, but it was the whole process of
Yeah,
what was
it was a
going
great
on in that
example of
section,
that.
So it was very interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's worth kind of putting in the butter churn to see what comes out of it. This idea of foundations, attitudes, standards, and portrayals. Um, but now I'm sensing it's time to make that practical.
Yeah.
The pentagram and this idea of attitudes leading to standards, because we did actually talk about that last time, didn't we?
Yes.
Talked about
Yes.
how you manufacture attitudes and then you use those in standards, in
Yes.
the development of standards with things. So I want to open it up with something that I think this world really needs. It has to do with cruelty. Cruelty. What is cruelty? I personally feel like our world is filled with cruelty of various different kinds, various different levels.
Complete lack of care, of
Hmm.
understanding, of
You sure
empathy.
that wouldn't be uncaring?
Yeah. Cruelty is more of that's an intentional. It's not
Uh-huh.
caring. And caring is can be unintentional, but it's just, I don't think it's so much as unintentional. Cruelty is intentionally inflicting up on another life form
There you go.
some state of misery or
Pain.
yeah, pain, and using it as a pleasure point, as a I'm getting rewarded, I'm getting bonus points, I'm feeding off that pain of that other individual or animal or whatever it is. It's like they feed off it. It's like being. I've always viewed people that have the cruelty in them like that is it's not bottom feeders. They're below the bottom feeders. They're the ones that are like the antithesis of life, of
Let me ask you
progression.
a question.
Yes, yes.
Why does a person become desensitized to cruelty? Why does a cruel person, I should say, become desensitized to their own cruelty? They've done these experiments, right, where they have a certain group of people that are put in the position of prisoners, and another group of people, they'll start off from the same pool. It's just an experiment,
Right,
right? And,
right.
and then they have the other group of people that are the prison guards.
Yes.
And it doesn't take long before the scenario begins to act out in a very strange and low way where the prison guards become abusive, become cruel. I mean, this is just people off the streets, right? That responded to an advertisement of, hey, we have a social experiment that we'd like you to partake in. Here's $100. Like that
Yeah,
would be
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
but yeah, how does that happen? How does a human that they just grab off the street, put in a particular position of power and authority, begin to act cruel, and then become so desensitized to it that the experimenters have to pull them out of the situation and say, hey, remember, you're not actually this. Your name is Joe something. Yeah. You're not
And
actually a prison guard. Why are you actually beating these other citizens? Sort of thing.
it,
How does the anesthetization happen with cruelty?
Animal Farm. Aldo Huxley, I believe, wrote the book way back in the 70s, I believe it
Yeah,
was.
okay.
Animal Farm or something like that. Group of kids on an island, and they
Yeah.
do the very same thing. And I'm trying to remember because we had to work through this in one of the classes. And over the years, I have seen this and asked myself that same question. And I don't know. It's almost like something. It's very for me. It's very similar to the flash mob in New York, where all of a sudden everybody's starting to do the same dance and motions to this music or whatever, or the what do you call it with the police? They have crowd control and then they have a riot there's actually right, and then there's the mob. I forget what the terminology is. Two differences there. The one, these individuals are still self-thinking. They can direct them and they can control it to a pretty good degree and stifle it. The police can. The other one, once it gets into that mob mentality, when they interviewed these individuals, interviewed separately after the situation is done, rectified or fizzled out, they ask the individual and they say, I don't know what happened, but something took over. Something
Sure. The mob
I
mentality.
mob, thank you very much. The mob
Yeah.
mentality.
Yeah.
So now watching people with this whole using those analogies or storylines is watching people that digress into cruelty. I've seen this with people that I work with that just you know, start out and they just get this hankering or whatever it is, and they gotta start poking at a fella.
Hmm.
And then I start to see the cruelty come in over a period of time. And I look at that and I go, wow, that person is being cruel to this other person in such I call it a depravity. It's a depravity to me. It's very depraved in its nature. Go from this family man to this monster to another life, to another human being in not only the statements but in actions of sabotage and stuff. And I go, wow, that's really odd. It's almost like being possessed by something. I don't think that's what it is necessarily, but
It absolutely is what it is. We're processing machines.
that's
You know,
where. But I wonder
possession
how.
is nothing more than enacting something you've connected to.
So that brings me to the question I've had for so many years: is how can, and I probably don't really want to know, and I probably already have the answer in me, but I just wonder how somebody could allow that in them, if that makes sense. That
Let's work
cruel.
into it. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's work
Yes.
into it then.
Yes.
Because you mentioned the idea of pain, inflicting pain. Now,
Right.
there's all sorts of different pain out there. You can
Right.
inflict pain in the thinking center. You can inflict moving center pain, instinctive pain, emotional pain, and sexual pain. All right. Even in the higher end of the sexual center, which is again creativity. You can stifle creativity. Now,
Yes. Yes.
animals are not cruel. When when a cat is about to pounce on a mouse, if you can see electrically, you'll see something very interesting happen. Same thing with a snake. Same thing happens with a snake. They project a gold force out of
Yes.
their eyes right before they pounce. And it has gold is an anesthetizing type of energy, isn't it? You know this. Like if you fire gold into someone's arm, you can make it go numb. Yeah,
Yes.
that sort of thing.
Yes.
So they project this gold energy into the mouse or whatever their prey happens to be, because nature isn't cruel, but it does still have needs, right? Everything eats something, doesn't it? We happen
Yeah.
to eat everything, but everything eats something. Um, so the antithesis to cruelty, if the snake wasn't projecting that gold into the mouse before it strikes, the mouse would experience pain in the form of cruelty. It would be a cruel act, but nature doesn't work that way. And so nature has allowed the attendance of gold force to go alongside of it to keep the cruelty aspect out. Now,
Right. Right.
gold is anesthetizing, as you know. I mean, you've done this before, right? You've fired gold force and caused people to go numb in various different places. You can do this. Every human can, um,
Yes.
if they have gold, I should say.
Right.
Which many don't. But anyway, that's beside the point. So it's important to recognize that one of the attending forces that goes with pain from a natural order standpoint is actually gold. Now, what happens when a person becomes cruel is they separate the gold from the act itself. They cause a division in themselves where they hold on to the gold and become anesthetized to the damage that it's causing to another
Right.
being.
Right. Right.
And so it's cruelty on one end and anesthetization on the other end. They are the ones that become anesthetized to it. And so what happens is they build up a tolerance. Yeah. And so the next time they're in a position where they exert cruelty on something, they anesthetize even more. Yeah. They keep building up this anesthetization in themselves instead of projecting it onto the thing that is in pain, or the individual, or whatever the case might be that's in pain. They store it, and it takes more and more and more, and they become more and more cruel over time because their thresholds go up. It's like a almost like a drug in that aspect. So the antithesis, if you hold a standard of no cruelty in yourself, you have to develop the ability to project gold into the target of cruelty, okay, into the victim of cruelty. You need to be able to, it's really in service to creation that you do this, that you project gold into it. Gold is the antithesis of cruelty. We are allowed a certain amount of pain, right, on the planet. We're allowed to inflict a certain amount of pain because otherwise we would never eat. Now,
Right. Right.
take the grocery store as an example. You walk down the meat aisle and everything is dishonest.
Yes.
Everything is, dyed red. It doesn't look like that really. Yeah, if you grind up beef or whatever, it's actually brown.
Yes. Yes.
But
Oxidized.
they dye it red and they package it in this kind of nice packaging, and these beautiful things, 80% lean, da 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 da. It's a lie, because what sits behind that meat, for example, and by the way, I'm not advocating vegetarianism. What I'm pointing to is the idea that even the culture anesthetizes us to the fact of what that animal went through in the process of becoming your dinner. Yeah. Like even today, I was watching something on, I was watching a debate on YouTube, and you've probably heard of this person. So I'm not even going to put his name out there. It doesn't really matter. But his argument was this. He said, if people weren't supposed to eat meat, why would God create a machine that turns grass into steak? Right? Now, you can take that one of two ways. You can chuckle at it and say, that's pretty funny, right? That's a funny way to think of a cow. But I don't. I don't chuckle at that because it's a removal from it's a form of the anesthetization of the cruelty that's going on this
Yes.
planet. So to me, that's not funny. It's not
Yeah.
funny because it's dishonest, just like the grocery store. And you know this. You've talked about your Native American friends, right? You know how they treat. They must kill something to eat it. Yeah. But then they thank it. They thank
Yes.
it for its
Yes.
life. They have
Yes.
genuine appreciation. Rabbit, I'm so sorry that I had to do this. It's part of what I need to survive. Thank you so much for giving your life so that my family can have their life. Thank you so much. Yeah. And we've moved away from that. We really have. We've moved away from that kind of sentiment. Now, again, I'm not saying become a vegetarian or a vegan or whatever, because in the end, it's more important what you process mentally, emotionally, than it is what you put in. It's more important what you put into your mind and your heart than it
Mhm.
is what you put into your mouth. And it's the least important aspect of it. People can be vegetarians and be absolutely filthy in their mentality,
Yes.
right? So, like, what good does that do, right? They can be the most cruel person to everyone around them. A great example is this: you get people in PETA, people for the ethical treatment of animals, that will go in to a meat factory and beat people to death with a baseball bat, right? That's fucked up. I have no other term for it than that.
That is so true. That is so true.
Now, or they'll set fire to places. They'll bomb fishing boats that are that are out there. All this type of stuff. Now, it's so contradictory that you just have to ask yourself, how can they do it? And the reason comes down to this self anesthetization because it's against human purpose to be that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to drive home here is that gold force, universal gold force, is the antithesis to cruelty. So if you actually hold a standard based on attitudes that you've developed, based on the foundations that you have grown in yourself, this type of thing, then the next result of that is your portrayal. Your portrayal that if you have developed a standard in yourself that you will not stand for cruelty, then your portrayal becomes one of making sure that you introduce gold in the right way anytime you see cruelty. And I said this before, there can be mental cruelty. If you come across someone who has been treated cruelly on a mental level, if you hold that standard in yourself, then your portrayal should be one of gold, of offering them anesthetization for this, of being able to take that pain from them through the godly act, if you will, of being able to anesthetize that. If you see it physically, I mean, physically is easy, right? Someone's in pain from cruelty, or even not cruelty, right? Someone has a toothache or something like that.
Right.
You, as someone who's been involved in this work for decades, can actually have the ability to take that pain from them because of the gold. Yeah, you can numb that and say, okay, now we're going to get you to a dentist. Yeah, and saying that you're going to get someone to a dentist, even if it costs you breakfast the next day and lunch, and dinner, or you don't eat for 24 hours because you only have enough money. You see where I'm going with this, right?
Right.
You
Exactly.
can take the
Exactly.
sacrifice yourself, take them to the dentist as a counterbalance, as a gold counterbalance to ensuring that there is less cruelty in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting raising rats and mice for my snakes.
Yeah.
I had uh, I had 12 constrictors, varying lengths from 1 foot to 7 foot. Um, it was so odd to hear somebody tell me that they wanted to watch my snake eat a eat a mouse or eat a rat, and I could feel it right there. It
I
was like, no,
would, I would, by the way, but from a different stance in myself.
that's exactly, that's exactly. But there,
Yeah.
but I could feel it. My point is, there was one individual that was genuine, that it was not coming from cruelty that I could feel, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It was from the sense of wonder and wanting to basically not witness it, but be part of it, not an observer of it, of the pain of another individual.
Yeah.
When I would handle my rats or my mice or my snakes, I had like a little ceremony for them, if you will. I addressed them and thanked them for the life that they were about to give, so that my snake could continue on living. And I had a great respect for my rats and mice, and people never understood that, so I kept my mouth shut after that. Most people, they don't understand that. They go, oh, it's just a snake, it's just a mouse, or it's just a rat. And I go, no, it's more than that. It's a life form. And trying to explain to people the respect that I have for this animal that's about to become part of this snake, ingested and part of my snake. But it was very interesting because I had to sit there and watch my snakes constrict and basically, devour that rat or mouse.
Yeah.
And some individuals were horrified, some were very titillated or got excited about that in a perverse way. But for me, what was very interesting is it was very impersonal, and there was no joy, there was no sadness. This is part of life, and I could watch my snake. Yeah, but it's interesting. Just going through this process with you right now, I can actually I think a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot of people, but I believe there's people that can relate to that, relate, not necessarily having snakes to experience it, but I think people can relate to that. And especially having what am I trying to say? Basically, most people I think would call it empathy um, for another human being.
Mm.
And I have a coworker that's that way. He's very contradictory in some ways, but he has that nature in him that he will take care of somebody, if that makes sense. He sees them needing assistance, needing education, whatever, and it's amazing how
Do
he'll
you
reach
know,
out.
though, do you know that sometimes taking care of someone is cruelty? I know people that do it for the wrong reasons, right? I know a lady, a woman, I'll say in this particular instance, who collects animals. Now,
Right.
the reason why she collects animals is not because of care for the animal, but it's because she has such a feeling that her life is out of control that she
Right.
needs to be able to control something lesser, right? Something that she perceives as lesser. And so she'll get dogs and cats and, she'll steal them out of people's yards. For example, if she sees a dog that's being, uh, that doesn't have water, she'll go unchain it, steal it, take it home. And it's then her dog, you see. Now, I'm okay with that to up to that point, but then it's what she does with them afterwards that tells me that there's something off, because what she will do is then become their lord and dominator and yell at the dogs and be cruel to these animals, even though the initial thing was to save it from cruelty. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is that cruelty can show up in very many strange ways. And of course, she's completely anesthetized to this in herself, that she's this way. She thinks that she is their savior. And it's horrifying. Yeah? And people
No,
do this with children. People adopt children for, sometimes for the same reason. They get them out of a terrible type of situation, right? Where they've been taken away by the state, for example, and then they put them in a situation where they just trade abusers. you know,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
something happens. But really, the point that I want to drive home
Yeah.
is this: is that you need a certain type of substance in yourself to be able to combat things that you cannot get behind. In the case of cruelty, it's gold. There are substances where or there are standards that you bring out into the world where yellow is more appropriate, where green is more appropriate, turquoise, pink, all of these types of forces that you learn to deal with, but maybe you don't know why. You know? I mean, I remember early on in my days in the way, I would experiment with firing blue force and firing yellow and all of these types of things.
I,
But there was never a nobility of reason behind it. Yeah. You can make someone have to pee, for example, by firing blue force at their kidneys. Yeah. You can. Yeah. Just like, oh
it
God, gotta
works.
go.
It
Yeah,
works.
that type of thing. You absolutely can. Now, does that meet the criteria of why the human is allowed to process and pump blue force? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So anyway, let's stick with cruelty,
Yes.
because if you're willing to take it up, I would like you, if you're willing to take it up, I would like you to experiment with the standard and the stance in yourself for the next week or however long, month, whatever you choose, of of anesthetizing cruelty wherever you see it. But it's much broader than you probably think at the outset, because once you develop and adopt that kind of standard, you'll realize, like I said before, that cruelty can happen on the mental, physical, instinctive, emotional, and sexual levels. Yeah, and so you begin to see cruelty in all kinds of places. An example is teasing. You can tease somebody, and there can become a point in teasing where it's no longer jovial chiding of someone. It's no longer a back and forth kind of banter. It becomes a form of cruelty. You know? And people, they'll laugh it off. Oh, you got me there, right? That type of thing. But you begin to see that inside they're feeling at lesser than themselves because of the teasing. It's a form of cruelty. People don't realize this, but it really can be.
It is. It can be. Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then you got to turn yourself to yourself. Are you cruel to you? What about you? Are you mentally cruel on yourself? Are you emotionally cruel to yourself? Yeah? Physically cruel to yourself? There's a point, isn't there? There's a point where people, runner's high is literally gold. Yeah, someone begins running and then they get the runner's high. That really is gold force, attended by certain hormones,
Right.
endorphins, I should say, which are, generally speaking, endorphins are they're almost a type of morphine, aren't they, that the brain produces? But what
Yes.
attends it electrically is a gold signal to be able to, nature is trying to relieve you of that pain. Yeah, it's a
Right.
gold force, anesthetizes it. But yeah, it goes everywhere. Yeah, once you begin to develop that standard, then you have a use for gold, as opposed to just experimenting with what it's like to be in the presence of something Egyptian, for example, or Buddhist, for example. You then can use that gold to help alleviate. And what that's called in the end is working on behalf of God and creation. It's a very planetary thing at that point in time. The planet then takes notice of you and says, this man is using gold the way that it was intended to be used, as opposed to just experimenting with it. Egypt, we've talked about Egypt before, very cold, wasn't it?
Right. Right. Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
but Egypt never would have existed if the culture hadn't already started to become cruel. There would have been no need for Egypt, you see. But creation then says this man is using gold in the way that is intended in the astral light, and it will give you more of it. And you can then offer more comfort, more peace, more anesthetization against the energy of cruelty in the world. And we talked about this last time too, right? We had the level of being. This is why you begin to implement standards, is because it helps to raise your level of being. Once you have a platform like this, then you can begin to raise that standard. It increases your level of being because the universe says that man is in process of something that I support, that I can get behind. He needs more gold to be able to do his job on my behalf. Now I'm rambling. But you get the point, don't you?
I do. I do. I do. Yeah, I was going to. It's funny because I don't want to poke at this establishment, but I do have to poke at it because I was part of it. I always joke around that I was forced into it right from the early age of Christianity or Catholicism, rather. Um, but it's amazing. I've seen that at a certain age. I realized the cat o' nine tails and that wood block and the Salif and the boar's hair shirt, et cetera, on down the way was all electrical, mental. It was no longer physical. And the cruelty that I've applied to myself for many, many years is unfathomable. The pain that I exacted up on myself mentally, psychologically, it's astounding. My point is that we do it to ourselves too, and
Absolutely, we do.
it
Yeah.
is stunningly devastating.
The
It's
examples are everywhere. Okay.
yes, yes, that's yeah,
For example, let's say that you're as people age, they become less tolerant of spicy foods in a lot of cases.
Right.
But the brain life doesn't, oftentimes doesn't care, right? The intestines are in absolute agony. The stomach is in absolute agony, but the brain gets a high from it. And so it will continue to eat spicy foods. This is just an analogy, really, but
Right.
you see
Right.
where I'm going with this is we can be one center. If it's out of balance, one center can actually be cruel to another
Yes.
in
No,
that stance, right? You know
yeah.
that your body can't handle the spicy foods, and your brain life says, but it titillates. It gives me kind of a high, because that is what happens when you eat
Yes.
spicy foods. The brain gets a kind of high. That's self cruelty. That's something that's out of balance in oneself because it's one center being cruel to another inside. The brain life can be a tyrant upon the rest of the complex, the rest of the systems. It
Exactly.
happens with the pentagrammic alignment of oneself that we get to the point where we avoid that kind of tyranny, yeah, from one center upon another in there. Because the brain is an electrical life, really. It doesn't feel the pain. Yeah. You can do brain surgery on somebody and they don't feel the pain whatsoever. The brain doesn't live with pain. So it can only intellectually understand it.
Right.
Yeah. So it can become a tyrant. Absolutely. Absolutely can. For some people, it's their body that becomes a tyrant. They run, they work out, they do all of these things to the point where it begins to have a negative impact on other systems in themselves.
Yes.
And they get
Yes.
like I said, the runner's high, the endorphins. It's interesting to me. This is sort of a natural law that everything carries its antithesis with it. Cruelty carries gold. Capsaicin is also a numbing agent. Did you know? Right? Capsaicin
Yes.
is
Yes.
that active ingredient in things like peppers, chili peppers, and whatnot. People use it for pain relief because it carries that anesthetizing property with it. But when
Yes.
it's used in excess, then it's out of balance. So everything in nature carries its antithesis. If you get bit by a snake, the most effective thing you can do is grab it, get its venom, and take it into the hospital with you so that they can, then begin a routine of being able to counteract what just happened to you. Same thing with deadly nightshade. Same thing with
Yes.
many of these types of plants out there that are poisonous or toxic to the human. Generally, if you look around it, if it's not in the plant itself, it will be in something that grows near the plant naturally.
Yeah.
But you get the antithesis. So it's not really the point of today's lesson, but it is the point of it does indicate something about the natural worlds and natural laws. Everything has its antithesis with it. In this case, the antithesis of cruelty is gold. Shouldn't say it that way. Let me put it this way instead. The antithesis of pain is gold.
Yes. Yes.
When
Yes.
pain is out of balance with its antithesis, it then becomes cruelty. That's what it is.
Yes.
So take it up if you like. I think the world could use less cruelty. Find ways to exert a golden influence upon these things. Sometimes it's actually a physical action, isn't it? Yeah. Gold isn't always just electrical.
No.
Gold is also not always just a physical, like a gold bar, an ingot or whatever. It's not that. Again, going back to the idea of air, earth, water, fire, wood, a lot of times it's metaphorical. How can you have a gold mentality towards something? Can you walk through the grocery store with the sentiment of gold inside you, of how many millions of animals suffer to be able to make that pretty package of ground beef? Yeah. Not saying don't eat it, not saying don't buy it. In Hinduism, India, that type of stuff, right? They don't eat cow, but
Right.
even the way that they prepare their vegetarian meals,
Hmm.
it they will do it with love and compassion. This plate of
Yes.
vegetables or this dish that they're making.
Yes.
taste so much different than if you just go to a restaurant where they're, stressed out and chopping and throwing ingredients and all this type of stuff in. That's what it is, though. Okay, so I just wanted to open up how you can take something from the standpoint of having your foundations and moving it all the way into something that you can actually do something with it. Yeah.
Right.
And I'll say this too, reverence is gold. We talked about reverence before. Reverence is a gold aspect. If you hold reverence while you eat something like this, you are generating the anesthetizing properties that are missing from that. Yeah. You kill and consume a a creature. If you hold that reverence for it, at least you're having that kind of natural response. That's what's natural to the human. That's why the Native Americans would do it, but with reverence.
Yeah,
And
huge difference.
gratitude
Huge.
is another gold motive. So it goes far beyond just firing force at things, doesn't it? It goes into what kind of attitudes go into these practices. Like, for example, do you know the attitude of reverence? Do you know
Right.
the attitude of gratitude? Ooh,
Right.
attitude of gratitude. I like that. Yeah, right. These are attitudes that you can then mix into things like standards, mix into things like this, and say reverence and gratitude are what's required for consuming this meal.
Right.
It's a very different way of going on, isn't it, than how we're taught in the culture. You know,
Yes.
I'd like a Big Mac, a side of fries, and a blah 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 blah. Right?
No,
Oh, can I take your order? Right?
now the other part for me of what you said about devouring, right, is there are times when it is it takes me 2 hours to have dinner
Mm-hmm.
versus just shoveling the food down.
Yeah.
But it's what's called for, and I see that a lot. People just jamming food down their throat to satiate a hunger or whatever, and sitting
Yeah,
down
it
with
goes more to the idea of consciousness and awareness, having an awareness about oneself, which of course is necessary if you're going to have any sort of standard or attitude with anything. You have to have the awareness. Maybe that should have been inserted in there because if you don't have awareness, you'll never know what attitude is required for various things. But I tell you, it does open up an
true.
extraordinary kind of life to be able to develop awareness and have attitudes and be able to approach things in life with the attitude that fits,
Yeah.
the attitude that fits for the scenario. So, okay, my friend, let's wrap it up. Yeah.